Welcome back to Road to Destruction, the World Wars. In our last episode, we witnessed Wilhelm II struggling against the very crisis he had helped set in motion. The July crisis had reached its boiling point, and Austria-Hungary's war against Serbia had ignited a chain reaction that threatened to engulf all of Europe. For over 2 decades, Wilhelm's erratic diplomacy had alienated potential allies and reinforced the rivalries that now threatened to tear the continent apart. And yet, even as his military leaders prepared for war, Wilhelm still clung to the hope that this disaster could somehow be contained. At the very last moment, a single telegram gave him the lifeline he so desperately needed: news that Britain would remain neutral. For the first time in weeks, it seemed like war might still be avoided. But what if it was all a mistake? What if the one message that could have saved Europe from catastrophe was nothing more than a tragic error? As the final days of July 1914 unfolded, Wilhelm found himself caught between the unstoppable momentum of his own military machine and his last-minute efforts to stop the crisis from escalating into a full-scale war. Just days earlier, on July 28th, Austria-Hungary had officially declared war on Serbia. Vienna, emboldened by Germany's unconditional support, had no doubt that its actions would provoke Russia. And sure enough, by July 29th, Russia responded by beginning partial mobilization of its army, a signal that it would not stand by and allow Serbia to be crushed. This was the moment Wilhelm had feared. In theory, Austria's war with Serbia was a localized conflict, but in practice it was anything but. For decades, the alliance systems of Europe had been tightening like a noose, and now that noose was beginning to constrict. The logic of war was clear. If Russia mobilized, Germany would have to respond, and if Germany mobilized, France, Russia's closest ally, would almost certainly follow. The Schlieffen Plan, Germany's carefully crafted war strategy, dictated that Germany had to strike first. If war was inevitable, then Germany needed to launch an immediate attack on France, sweeping through Belgium and knocking out the French military before turning east to face Russia. But Wilhelm wasn't ready to accept war. Not yet. He still believed that diplomacy could prevent the crisis from spiraling out of control. On July 30th, as Russia escalated to full mobilization, Wilhelm was furious. He believed this was a sign of war, but at the same time he saw a glimmer of hope. Perhaps mobilization was only a show of force, meant to pressure Austria-Hungary into negotiations rather than signal a full-scale conflict. Determined to prevent a continental war, Wilhelm sent a personal appeal to Tsar Nicholas II, his cousin, whom he affectionately called Nicky. He pleaded with Nicholas to call off the mobilization, assuring him that Germany had no desire for war. But Nicholas, pressured by his own generals and advisors, was no longer in full control. Russia's military leaders were convinced that if they waited any longer, Germany would strike first. There was no turning back. Then, at the most crucial moment of the crisis, Wilhelm received a telegram that seemed to change everything. Britain would remain neutral. This was the best news Wilhelm could have hoped for. If Britain stayed out of the war, then France might hesitate. And if France hesitated, Russia could be pressured into backing down. The crisis could be contained after all. Wilhelm rushed to his military advisors with a radical idea. What if Germany stayed neutral? If Russia insisted that its mobilization was defensive, then perhaps Germany didn't need to declare war at all. He even suggested cancelling the Schlieffen Plan, halting all military preparations, and using diplomacy to de-escalate the situation. For a brief moment, it seemed like the nightmare could still be avoided. But Wilhelm had been deceived, not by his enemies, but by his own optimism and a critical translation error in the telegram he had received. Britain was not staying neutral. The message had been misinterpreted. Britain was still undecided, but its government was increasingly leaning towards supporting France and Russia. By the time Wilhelm realized the mistake, it was too late. In the German military high command, Wilhelm's hesitation was seen as dangerous weakness. To them, the war was already inevitable. The only question was whether Germany would act first, or be forced into a defensive war on two fronts. Chief of Staff Helmuth von Moltke had no patience for Wilhelm's diplomatic maneuvering. He saw this as the final opportunity to launch the war on Germany's terms. Moltke, who had spent years preparing for war, was shocked and furious at Wilhelm's sudden change of heart. He argued that Germany had no choice but to proceed with full mobilization, as Russia was already mobilizing, and any hesitation would put Germany at a severe disadvantage. But Wilhelm, momentarily convinced that a general European war could still be prevented, dismissed Moltke's concerns. Frustrated and humiliated, Moltke was sent home in disgrace, feeling that his life's work had just collapsed. This was a devastating moment for Moltke. His entire strategy and the Schlieffen Plan relied on Germany striking first before Russia and France could fully mobilize. If Germany delayed, the plan would fall apart, and Germany would face war on two fronts with no advantage. That night, overwhelmed by stress and convinced that the Kaiser was making a catastrophic mistake, Moltke suffered a nervous breakdown. But Wilhelm's relief was short-lived. Within hours, the error in the telegram was discovered. Britain had not declared neutrality. It was still undecided, and worse, its government was leaning towards supporting France and Russia. Suddenly, Wilhelm's hopes of a localized war collapsed completely. Realizing his mistake, Wilhelm had no choice but to recall Moltke. The shaken chief of staff returned to the palace, now vindicated, and informed Wilhelm that there was no turning back. Russia was mobilizing, France would inevitably follow, and if Germany did not act immediately, it would be crushed. Reluctantly, Wilhelm gave in to the military's demands. On August 1st, 1914, Germany declared war on Russia. This moment was a turning point, not just for Germany, but for Wilhelm himself. His last attempt at diplomacy had failed, and with Moltke back in control, the German war machine was now unstoppable. With Germany now at war with Russia, France was left with no choice. The Franco-Russian alliance had been designed specifically for this scenario. If Germany attacked Russia, France would join the war. Wilhelm, still clinging to the hope of avoiding a broader war, made a last-minute plea to French President Raymond Poincaré, asking if France would remain neutral. But it was already too late. The alliance system dictated that France had to stand with Russia. On August 3, 1914, Germany declared war on France. The Schlieffen Plan was now in motion. German troops began mobilizing toward Belgium, setting the stage for Britain's entry into the war. Wilhelm's nightmare had become reality. The conflict he had spent years trying to avoid, yet had done so much to provoke, was now unavoidable. As war engulfed Europe, Wilhelm realized how little control he had over the empire he once ruled with confidence. His belief that Germany could contain the crisis had crumbled. His own miscalculations, reckless foreign policies, and trust in Austria-Hungary had led Germany into a war it was now powerless to stop. But Wilhelm would not be the only leader forced to confront the consequences of this war. Across the continent, another emperor, Franz Joseph of Austria-Hungary, was facing his own empire's reckoning. Austria-Hungary had fired the first shot of World War I, but would it survive the war it had started? Join us in the next series as we explore the decisions, mistakes, and fate of Franz Joseph and Austria-Hungary, the empire that would soon find itself fighting for its very survival. If you've been following Wilhelm's journey, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. This war is only just beginning, and in the next series, we'll see how Austria-Hungary started down the road to its final gamble and downfall.